it is quite impressive that Rapido has got you covered for pretty much every which way you want to go with the detail for your model. Hi there everyone, I hope I find you well. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Jennifer Kirk up here in the loft on Weir Yard, and today we're going to be looking at a model that's from a manufacturer that I've never reviewed on the channel before. Now it might be more familiar to viewers who come from Canada or America, and they are Rapido trains. They've been very prolific in those markets, but over here in the UK they've only really dabbled doing special commissions for organisations such as the National Railway Museum and Model Rail magazine, and it's the latter that we turn to today with their commissioning of the J70 locomotive. Now you're probably more familiar with this very unusual prototype as it was the basis of inspiration for Reverend W. Awdry's Toby the Tram Engine in the Railway Story. So I'm really excited to actually take a look at this because it is so different from any other locomotive that I've got in my collection. Don't forget as well that we're going to be doing a full DCC fitting guide later on with the appropriate decoder from the channel sponsor Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders and accessories designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts. And you can find a link to this model where you can buy it from in the description box down below. It takes you to Model Rail magazine where this model was exclusively commissioned for, and you can buy it in a number of different variants, and we've also got a link down there that you can check out for that appropriate decoder from Train-O-Matic as well. But come with me, I'm really excited to show you this model. This is the model as it comes from Model Rail. You can see there emblazoned on the box. These are the people who commissioned this model from Rapido trains. Now Rapido are primarily a manufacturer in the Canadian and US outline markets, and they've built up a reputation for amazing attention to detail and quality of model, and I'm hoping that this is no exception to that as they break into the UK market. As you can see on here, the LNER J70 060 tank, although from the picture what you're seeing is what to a great many of you is familiar as Toby the Tram Engine, and it's not immediately obvious in this form that the model is actually an 060 locomotive with actually full Walschutz's valve gear underneath there as well. There are quite a few different versions that were commissioned, and these models are a detail minefield. So if you want to be completely accurate to your model at a particular time frame, then they do have the model to cover you, and there are a number of different detail options that the user can apply should they so wish to make your model totally accurate to the locomotive of your choosing, of the time period of your choosing. But here, catalogue number MR-203. This is the BR early emblem that I've chosen, number 68225. Now there were 12 of these made, and actually on the box it does give you a little bit of information about these, and they were built by the Great Eastern Railway, and the whole purpose of these was that they needed a locomotive that complied with the Board of Trade rules with regard to locomotives running in areas where you had tracks that shared the same space with pedestrians and road vehicles, with no gates or fences to kind of protect one from wandering in front of the other. And that required the cow catchers and the side skirts to cover the locomotive's motion. Now there were a few locations where this was the case, so Ipswich Docks, parts of a system in Great Yarmouth as well, but most famously the Wisbech and Upwell tramway, which was built quite cheaply, followed the course of roads in the main, cut the costs down, but it meant that they had to have a locomotive that complied. Now there was an 040 version, which outwardly actually it's quite difficult if you don't know what you're looking for to tell the 040 versions, which I think from memory were a Y6 was their designation. Now don't quote me on that, but the LNER encyclopedia has a lot of really great information on these, and in fact any other locomotive that made it into LNER ownership. The box is actually, I didn't mention that. I know some people do find this important. It's really, really well packaged using this foam, which means that the model, even if your method of delivery drop kicks this into your hedge, the model itself should survive unscathed. And the cardboard box is a bit like the ones that we've seen from Hellion and Dapol. Really, really strong. And I know some people make fun of people being interested in the boxes, but I think the quality of the box does set you up for what kind of quality you're going to get therein. It comes with this manual, which gives you a lot of information about identities of locomotives, and even though all 12 of these passed into British Rail ownership, according to everything that I've read up on them, what is interesting that the original number 138 doesn't appear to have ever received a BR number, so I can only conclude that whilst it passed into BR ownership, it may well have been in a withdrawn state and probably was getting cannibalized for parts to keep the others going. Now, they didn't last that much longer. By 1955, they were all withdrawn, all 12 of them en masse, and also the Y6 versions as well. The reason that the Great Eastern Railway had to introduce these was because actually during the summer, the traffic on places like the Wisbech and Upwell Railway was actually so increased with a lot of farm produce that the 040 versions were struggling. So the 060 version just brought that extra power to the running. Now, the rest of this little pamphlet just gives you a lot of information on DCC fitting, and stay tuned for that. We're going to be doing a full DCC fit later in the review, but also a number of different detail options such as cow catchers, and the windows can be modelled in opened and closed states. Now, the model itself does resemble almost like a garden shed, and it had a lot of these opening windows and hatches front and back, and primarily some of these were actually about getting ventilation. You could imagine a garden shed with a boiler and fire and everything in there. It's going to get very hot, especially in summer. So what you will see in a lot of the prototype pictures is these hatches and the windows wide open, trying to get some ventilation through to the poor crew that were having to swelter inside of these things. So you can see here all the information on fitting the detail, and it's really, even down to works plates, you can go down that route. They're all here to add if you so wish. So we're going to put that to one side, and let's have a look at the model itself. It's really easy to get out of the packaging, but you can see that these bags of detailing just keep coming. Now, these are the cow catchers, and also these sort of doors that go with the hatches at the front and back of the locomotive. Now, I am going to fit these because obviously they need to be on there either open or closed, but it does give you the option to fit them both ways. The cow catchers as well, you get supplied duplicates. So with and without this kind of window that the NEM pocket couplers can poke through, if that's the route you want to go down. So really, it is quite impressive that Rapido has got you covered for pretty much every which way you want to go with the detail for your model. Now, the locomotive itself, it's a bit like some of the other small locomotives that we have reviewed on this channel recently. The photographs that you see online really don't give justice to just how tiny these locomotives really are. The wheelbase on these wasn't actually that much longer than the 040 versions, and what amazes me about these is even though it's got this small size, the amount of weight here is incredible. And don't believe for 1 minute that this shed-like box on top is completely filled with a metal weight. It is not. We've got a fully detailed interior as per the prototype. They have not compromised what's going on inside here to get the weight in. Now, in the instructions, it does say, don't try and dismantle all this. I guess it's a case of the detail is there, but it's not really intended for you to take all this apart. And certainly when we come to the DCC fitting, as you'll see, the chassis detaches, leaving all of this detail and stuff intact, which is really great because it does look like it's very, very fine in there. The locomotive that's inside this is probably a lot more conventional than you might think. We've got a boiler with the firebox at this end, with the funnel up there with the spark arrestor on the top. At the other end you can see the firebox and all the other trimmings on the equipment, and these were actually double cabbed. They could be driven from either end, so they didn't need to be turned around. And also, if you're wondering, this pipe across the roof, the idea behind this is this connects the safety valves via a pipe to the water tank. And the idea behind this is they didn't want to startle horses, so if the safety valves lifted, rather than making a sudden noise, it would channel the steam and with it the noise through the water tanks in a bit like the condensing apparatus worked for some of the locomotives designed to work on the Metropolitan Railway. The locomotives as well were fitted from new with side skirts, but I've actually chosen this version of the model with the side skirts removed because actually I wanted to see and enjoy all of this very, very complicated Walschaerts valve gear and the correctly patterned single spoke wheels that Rapido has tooled up there. But of course, if you want one to run on the Wisbech and Upwell, then it will need those side skirts. They also had a governor that allowed them to, well, actually stopped them from exceeding 12 miles an hour when they were working on the tramways. But this governor was able to be disengaged so that when these ran on the main line, actually they could put in quite a spirited performance and were capable of quite a turn of speed. And I can only imagine that when running light locomotive, they probably looked more akin to a runaway brake fan than anything else. But as you can see, so different to any other locomotives that have been released ready to run. And it really does capture that charm of Toby the tram engine. And I can imagine that there's probably a market out there for 3D printed faces to actually very carefully slot in where those cupboard style doors would normally go, to convert this into a really, really great Toby the tram engine. Now, it's probably a little bit grey market. I know there's a lot of licensing goes on, and Bachmann are releasing the Thomas the Tank Engine range later, but just saying, cottage industry, 3D printed face, Toby the tram engine. As I said before, the weight in this is incredible, and also I was quite struck by these chains, which I guess were actually there, and again a detail minefield. They got added and subtracted at various times through these locomotives' lives. These were for tying up the side skirts, these were hinged when they were fitted, and this would allow them to be tied up so that they wouldn't flap about and potentially cause damage when these locomotives were making a spirited mainline run. It doesn't come fitted with the cow catchers, but I am going to fit these later on. But I want to keep the couplings, and these come factory fitted, slimline couplings, tension locks in NEM pockets, so you can change these for whatever you so wish. The buffers are all fully sprung, turned metal, really nicely done. And you would have thought actually what amounts to a garden shed on wheels might have been an opportunity to really skimp on the detail, but Rapido have not done so. Just looking inside there is really exquisite detail inside the actual structure of these. The windows are quite easy to break loose from the light glue in the frame, and then you can model them in open positions and they just slid on runners. As I said before, it's something that they tended to run around with these open for ventilation. That spark arrestor on the top of the funnel there, that is actually a very fine etched piece. It's not a solid piece. You can actually see air all the way through, and that is amazing attention to detail. Looking through the front there, that's the smoke box. That's all metal inside there. It's part of the way that this model gets all of its weight. And there's even, as you can see, printed onto the gauge is the needle and all of the markings. So nicely done. Those lamp irons there as well, separately applied, very fine metal detail, and it is just exquisite. It is lovely. It's rapidly becoming one of my favourite models. Not least because I was a big fan of Thomas the Tank Engine when I was young. Who wasn't? But this really is a model with an immense amount of charm. Sadly, none of the J70s survived into preservation, which is a great shame because I think that they would have been a very, very popular locomotive in preservation, not least because of the Thomas the Tank Engine connection. Brake rigging underneath is factory applied. You don't have to mess about with any of that. And you can see there we've got drive to the, that is the rear axle. And then we've got the connecting rods, all metal. And what's quite interesting is because of the very short wheelbase, the connecting rods to the pistons and the crosshead and the cross slides is actually all the way back to the rear axle rather than the center axle. And that is an all metal construction in there and really, really silky smooth. When I've had this running, it has run absolutely perfect, and that additional weight really does make a big difference. Now, there doesn't appear to be much in the way of springing to any of these axles, so you just have to be a bit careful on uneven track that it can kind of cock a wheel up and lose some electrical connectivity. On DC, it did run flawlessly for me. And we're going to now turn on to the DCC Fitting. I have chosen the Trainomatic wired 6-pin decoder. Now, you can also use the direct plug 6-pin decoder. That will work equally as well, and indeed will leave you some more space for something like a stay alive, should you so choose. But I had the wired 6-pin to hand, and it does fit equally as well. And what you do find with Trainomatic is that when demand is high, I've often found that the 6-pin wired decoder does always remain in stock. So it is a handy way of making sure that you can still always DCC fit these models. For doing this, we need our trusty jeweler's screwdriver set, and again, just going to pick the small crosshead screwdriver, and turning the model upside down, what we're looking for are these 4 screws. There's 2 here at this end, either side of the coupling, and again the same at the back. It's just really, really easy. It's actually surprisingly easy. This model is not as complicated for doing this as you might think, because as the instructions say, we do not have to delve down inside the shed construction over the top. I keep calling it that. It's probably people shouting and screaming at the camera, but tough. Toby was a mobile garden shed. Nah, I loved it really. So I'll just take those 4 screws out, and I'm going to stick those to the screwdriver so we don't lose them. And then all we need to do is be careful, a little bit careful here what you grab hold of. I find either grabbing not the connecting rods but the very top of the wheels and just give it a wiggle, and the entire chassis comes straight out here. Now, I did already fit this for a test run, but I'm going to go through the entire fitting sequence for you. And actually what's apparent is that you can see in there all of that weight, that boiler and all the detail and the water tanks, everything that's inside the top part of the model, and in fact the sole bars and the chassis parts, that is all solid metal, and that goes to really give this an incredible weight to it. It's an amazing model. And in fact, actually, whilst I've got the bottom off here, these steps as well are metal and very firmly placed, so there's no real risk of damage off this. And indeed, in all the handling, I've had no problems whatsoever with detail coming free. Now, what we find in the top here is, I'm just going to unplug this. There'll be a small 6-pin blanking plate just in there. Now, there's no numbers on it, and the instructions actually don't give you too much information on which way round the chip goes. But what I actually found is that that arrow there Take that arrow as denoting pin 1 and you will not go wrong whatsoever. We can also see that we've got mounting points for speakers and all sorts, and what we actually have here is a factory fitted speaker in an enclosure, which is another really nice touch. This actually clips into this enclosure above the worm gear there, so I'm just going to clip that back in. The actual sticky there has just come loose, but what it means is that with the right sound decoder, this is a doddle to sound fit. You will of course need your 6-pin decoder for that, but we're just going to go down a regular route here. So I've got the 6-pin wired decoder from Trainomatic. Like I said before, direct plug 6-pin works equally as well. And we're looking for the orange wire is pin 1, and as I said before, that arrow there is the pin 1 side of the connection board. Line up those pins, gentle pressure, wiggle a little bit if needed, push it all the way home, and then it's simply a case of neatening up all of the wires, get the decoder in place, and then we're just going to make sure that we get the body the right way round and just make sure that the wiring goes in. If you need to, just take your screwdriver and just make sure that that wiring is tucked into place. You don't want to trap that anywhere. You'll have no such difficulty if you go for the direct plug decoder, but of course I had the wired one to hand, so that's the route that I've decided to go down. And then it's just a case of wiggling the chassis and it will slide in all the way home, and then just simply a case of refitting these screws. Don't over tighten them. If the chassis doesn't go all the way home, it's more than likely you've got a wire trapped, so do make sure that you don't force anything. But this is a really easy DCC fit, and that pre-fitted speaker with solder pads for the speaker connections to the decoder also mean that a sound fitting of this model is another really easy proposition. And there you have it, a DCC fit is as easy as that. Out of the box, the decoder comes natively set to decoder number 3, but you can put this now on the programming track and get it programmed up, and we can get it running on the layout. I just want to look at some of the other detail that comes with this model. So you can see there we've got various etched metal plates. We'll need a quick dab of paint just to finish them off, but these are here if you wish to apply any of this extra detail. And then we've also got there a whole host of extra window frames if you wish to model the windows in the open position. Now I'm not going to fit any of these, but it's really nice to see that Rapido trains have provided all of these to users who want to go that extra mile. The detail which I do want to look into is of course these cow catchers and the additional doors. And what I might do is look to model one set open, one set closed for the nose doors. Although, does it really have 2 noses? I'm not sure. We also get these couplings as well, which we can add with the hooks, and that's if you wish to. Again, all of this detail is if you wish to, but what I will say is that these doors, they need to really be on there, either open or closed. As you can see as well, these cow catchers, we've got 2 different sets supplied, and they really are quite fine. They're moulded in a very springy, flexible plastic. And the detail level is really nice. Now in the native form they look amazing, but of course that does preclude you from using the slimline tension lock coupling. So they've also provided these, and it's whether or not you wish to fit these and have that kind of letterbox opening, which is a necessary evil to have that type of coupling fitted, and I suppose it's your choice whether you do or not. I'm going to see what the model actually looks like with these fitted. I want to keep the tension lock couplings, and I'm guessing that a lot of other people might as well. but you could indeed fit an ordinary one on the other end of the model. Maybe that's a way I might go, so then we have the best of both worlds. The couplings themselves, just really easy to take on out. Just going to grasp hold of that and pull. And that just comes out as per usual method. And then I'm going to try and fit one of these. I think what we're going to actually need is a little dab of glue. So you can see there on the underside we've got two locating holes. Just going to move that chain out of the way, and let's just test fit this. So it looks a little bit on the fiddly side. I could imagine that it would probably be easier if we could take the mem pocket off, but I'm going to try and not go down that route if I can help it. So just trying to get this in. I do really like the fact that we get that little bit of a cutout for some of the detail. And actually it's interesting, it does seem to locate pretty well. Let me just try and push that in. It may just be a push fit actually, looking at this. I can feel a very positive click as it goes home, so actually that doesn't need any additional glue whatsoever, which is a nice touch. And then once that is in, we can get the coupling back and just refit that through this letterbox aperture into the tension lock coupling. And actually that does disguise a lot of that hole. It's not as bad as I thought it might be, and that really does improve the look of the front of this locomotive. And I think what I will do now that I know what I'm doing, I'm going to go down the same route for the other end. You could always fit this with, you could go for the solid cowcatcher, but actually I think I'm going to stick with the one with the cutout, so I've got the flexibility of using the couplings. And there is of course full instructions on where all of the detail parts go in that very comprehensive manual that comes with the model. So I'm just going to push fit this in, again positive lock into those holes, and the coupling straight back in, and that gives us the look of a locomotive that retains its cowcatchers but has lost its side skirts. And there's a good deal of clearance at the bottom, so it shouldn't affect running whatsoever, because that's going to be well clear of things like point blades and check rails. When it comes to the end doors, it's best to consult the manual, and it gives you some great detail on how these need to fit together. Now you're going to need some kind of glue to do this. The Rapido trains recommend the deluxe materials Plastic Magic, but I don't have any of that to hand, so I'm going to be quite daring and just use some Humboldt poly cement. In the closed position, just make sure that the diagonal braces go to the inside. These are actually a reasonably easy fit and just slot in. But looking at the pictures and reading in the text, what it suggests is that these doors were pretty much in operation, always left in the open position. So I'm going to fit the open versions on this model. Again, very daring. I'm going to take very small amount, don't let too much come out, and what I'm actually going to do is just actually run a very small bead on both sides, and then using this picture as the guide with the way that the diagonals go, I am going to just very carefully locate and press. And remember, those diagonals go a certain way. As you can see there, I will get these on and then I will show you. It's very important to get these right, otherwise, I'll tell you now, it will stick out to you like a sore thumb. So we've got both of those in. And that is the way that the bracing needs to go on these. We're going to turn to the other end. And actually, with all that detail in there, I'm going to model them both in the open position. I think that it would be a crime to hide some of that detail. So again, we need to make sure that we get these doors the right way round. Just double check. And again, this can be just a little bit fiddly. But they do locate into place. One final door, just make sure. And just very carefully position them. And we're going to let that cement set, but already we've got much improved look to the model. And the unused parts I'm just going to put back in the bag in the box and keep hold of them should I ever need them. We turn now to the scores. First up is finish. And actually, taking this out of the box, my initial reaction was that this was an incredibly good model. And the more I've handled it, the more impressed I've become. It really hasn't disappointed in any aspect. If there's one area that I could draw fault to, is that the paint on the wooden parts of this locomotive looks very, very shiny, almost like it's a prototype that has been very thickly painted. It's a minor observation, and probably most so there where we see on those end doors, but it is a minor observation. Everything else on this model I was really, really pleased with. And when you look inside it, inside that cab, the detail just keeps on giving. Everything is finished really nicely inside there. And I particularly liked those gauges that had almost legible dials on the front. And it's one of the reasons that I've chosen to model my example with both sets of nose doors wide open. Because in my opinion, it would be something of a crime to obscure some of that lovely detail that's visible inside this model. So I'm going to give this a 9.4 out of 10. When it came to functionality, the model did run reasonably well. On the DCC Concepts rolling road, it did run flawlessly, and as per the instructions, I gave it a good 20 to 30 minutes running in each direction on about half power, and it did, as the instructions said it would, get somewhat smoother and more responsive as it went. Although it has to be said that out of the box you would not be disappointed with its performance. On the track though, one of the areas which I felt was a little bit of a detraction was that the lack of any springing on the 3 axles meant that this locomotive was a little bit hostage to uneven track, and it was quite possible for it to cock a leg on anything that was even slightly twisted. And that meant that I found it to stutter a little bit over some of the dodgier aspects of my track work when it was running on DCC. It's something that I think that this model would certainly be improved with the application of a Stay Alive power pack. And one of the areas that you could explore is the Train-O-Matic power pack. You would be wanting the smaller of the two, and do bear in mind that whilst the capacitor does come hard soldered to the board, it is possible to unsolder that and add in a set of wires if you wish to move the capacitor to another location to make fullest use of the space. If you're not sound fitting this model, it's probably a good idea to consider removing that speaker to provide the space for that Stay Alive. Overall though, for something with such a short wheelbase, that extra weight that this model carries really did help it. So I'm going to give this an 8.7 out of 10. Ease of use with the DCC fitting was really, really good. I really like the way that the design of this model is such that the chassis just drops straight out and you don't have to worry about all of this fabulous detail. It just all goes together really, really well, and at no point was there any risk of bits falling off, even though we've got some really nice delicate metal chains on the side there. None of these ever seem to be in any jeopardy. Once inside the model, it was quite easy to DCC fit it, and there is a reasonable amount of space, so much so that the larger factor Trainomatic 6-pin wired decoder was able to fit in there with no problems whatsoever. I also particularly like the sound speaker that comes pre-fitted in this model. It's something that we started to see more and more, and from my own experience of fitting sound, it really is a boon to the modeler that wants to go down this route, that we don't have to hack apart things to try and mount a speaker and then work all kind of little fiddles just to make it give a good sound quality. Straight from the manufacturer, that is completely covered. So I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. When it comes to aesthetics, I just love this Locomotive. It really captures the look and feel of the J70 so well. It's a very distinctive prototype that, well, I suppose looks more like a brake van than a locomotive. I love the different options that Rapido trains have tooled up. So from the Model Rail website, you can see that there are all different versions to cover this in all stages of its life, not just livery details, but these side skirts as well. I really like the look of the ones with the side skirts. They take me back to my childhood days and Toby the tram engine. But with this Walschaerts valve gear, I thought it would be an absolute shame to cover that up, which is why I chose specifically this version. But if you want one that's authentic to the Wisbech and Upwell, they are there to buy. The only area, as I commented before, is that the finish on the wooden planks doesn't quite look like wood to me, but it's a minor detraction. Everything else about this model is really good, so I'm going to give this a 9.9 out of 10. When it comes to value for money, for what is actually quite a small locomotive, you could start to argue that it's quite expensive at around the £120 to £130 mark. But in all honesty with you, I think you get an awful lot of locomotive for your money. The weight on this is incredible. The detail in there is amazing. And I think an awful lot of people are just all too pleased that a J70 has finally made it to the ready-to-run market. And there would have been so many options to cut corners with this body that hides so much of the actual internal workings, allowing them to have perhaps skimped in a great many areas. They could have only offered it with the side skirts on and done away with a lot of this mechanism underneath to cut costs, but they haven't done that, and it doesn't affect the price. In this age where we're seeing locomotives passing regularly the £200 and even £300 mark, it is refreshing to be able to get such a distinctive prototype for the price that you do. And I've got no hesitation to say that with a model of this quality, with all of those different detail options there for you to effectively make a very accurate rendition of the prototype you want to model in the era that you want to model, this model is certainly deserving of a 9.5 out of 10. And that gives us a really respectable score of 47.5. Is this a model I can recommend? Wholeheartedly so. This model gets a great thumbs up, and you won't be disappointed with a prototype that looks so different from any other model that you will have on your model railway. Well, I hope that that video was really informative to you. And again, as I said at the beginning, you can check out at the link in the description box Model Rail magazine in the UK, who commissioned this model, and there are a number of different variants available covering the periods of London and North Eastern Railway operation and British Rail operation of these prototypes. And we've also got a link down there as well if you want to check out the decoder that we used in today's DCC fitting guide. But until next time, don't forget to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Remember, sharing is caring, and it's a great way to help out the channel. And also you can help out the channel if you really wish to by heading on over to Patreon, and you can help us to make the videos that you want to see. And I love to hear from you as well. Leave a comment in the comment section down below, and I do read all of those. But until next time, you take great care of yourself, and happy modelling. This is me, Jenny Kirk, saying bye for now. Today's video is sponsored by Trainomatic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, and an extra special huge thanks goes out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, Helen Sink, Peter Bolton, Brian and Dorothy Mudd, Gary Lewis, David Quinn, Sparky 107107, George Botterini, Andy Finch, Chris Moss, Robert Sears, MD of San Juan Model Company and Grant Line Products, Sam Yates, Dale Williams, and Mo Henry. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.